Philadelphia Eagles are back in the Super Bowl for their second time in 6 seasons, and the roster that they have constructed by Howie Roseman is pretty insane. But welcome to the channel. If you are new here, consider subscribing and dropping a like on the video if you do enjoy it. We're on that road to 5,000 subscribers, so if you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. But the Philadelphia Eagles have practically had a fairy tale type season this year, finishing the regular season 14-3, with many people considering them the best team in football heading into the playoffs for much of the year. Going into this season, the Eagles are one of the most interesting teams in the entire league with how their season was going to play out. I recognize the talent and especially all the moves that they made, which we will get into, but I wasn't sure about Jalen Hurts and how all the pieces for the team would come together. We saw it towards the end of the 2021 season when they finished 6-2 in their last 8 games to make the playoffs, and although they didn't make noise in the wildcard game against the Bucks, I think it was pretty good experience for some of the young players and especially Jalen Hurts to come back next year even stronger. It was pretty obvious when watching that the Eagles are pretty overmatched in that game against Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. They fell 31-15 and scored their 15 points in the fourth quarter when the game was pretty much over. But the fact that they were able to go on that run towards the end of the season and even make the playoffs, I thought was a good sign for them heading into 2022. To make sure they got over the top, Howie Roseman made a ton of moves in the offseason, including some huge blockbuster trades that really have put the team over the top this year. Starting with what I see as the best move they made all offseason was going out and getting AJ Brown from the Tennessee Titans. The Eagles traded the 18th and 101st pick to the Titans for AJ Brown, and he has been an absolute stud for them all season long. He had a career year with 88 catches, 1,496 yards, and 11 touchdowns. And even just the presence of AJ Brown has opened things up across the board for the other Eagles' wide receivers such as Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins, and even their tight end Dallas Goedert. So we know how good AJ Brown is in his own right, but the fact that he's been able to open things up across the board for the Eagles wide receivers, I think has also really helped out that offense this season. One thing that hasn't changed for the Eagles from 2021 is how great their rushing attack is on offense. We've seen it especially in the playoffs against the Giants and the 49ers, where the passing attack wasn't really the vocal point of the offense, but they were still able to pound the ground the entire game. Miles Sanders made the Pro Bowl this year, and he had the 5th most rushing yards in the league this year with 1,269 and 11 touchdowns. You combine that with Jalen Hurts, who had 760 yards and 13 touchdowns of his own, and that's a very scary rushing attack that's hard for any team in the NFL to stop, even the best run defenses like the 49ers. But now that I mentioned Jalen Hurts, I think it's time to give him some flowers for how he played this season. For much of the season, he was an MVP candidate, and many people even had him edging out Mahomes for the MVP. Unfortunately, he suffered a shoulder injury which held him out a few games, which definitely hurt his MVP case. But I really do believe if Jalen Hurts never suffered that injury, he would have competed with Mahomes for that award. I've already mentioned his rushing stats, but his passing stats were also very good despite missing 2 games. Hurts completed 66.5% of his passes for 3,700 yards, 22 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions with a 101.5 quarterback rating. So just an amazing season from Hurts, and we saw his value, especially when Gardner Minshew had to step in for him when he got hurt. That's been a narrative pretty much all season long that if you put in Gardner Minshew or an average quarterback, they would step in and have just as much success as Jalen Hurts had during the regular season. But in the 2 games that Hurts missed, the Eagles lost both games with Minshew having multiple turnovers in both games against the Cowboys and the New Orleans Saints. So I think in those 2 weeks, Hurts really did prove his value, especially with his legs and what he can contribute to that offense that Minshew and other quarterbacks just can't. The off-script playmaking for Hurts, I think, is his best quality, and we've seen so many crazy plays this season of him just making something out of nothing. The last real component I want to talk about for the Eagles' offense is their offensive line, which has proved to me to be the best in football. Led by Jason Kelce at the center position, they have not had trouble against any defensive front this season. Going into the playoff game against the 49ers, I thought that was going to be the key matchup, their offensive line versus the 49ers defensive line, and who would win that battle would pretty much win the game. Jalen Hurts was kept clean all game long, there was running lanes wide open for Miles Sanders, and the Eagles' offensive line pretty much dominated from start to finish. So you combine the best offensive line in football with a very dynamic quarterback in Jalen Hurts. You have a great trio of wide receivers with AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Quez Watkins, a great all-around tight end in Dallas Goedert, and a Pro Bowl running back in Miles Sanders, and the Eagles are absolutely loaded on the offensive side of the ball. But despite all of that, what I've been most intrigued, especially since the playoffs have started, is the play of the defense. Going into the playoffs, there were some questions about this defense and if they were going to be able to stop the run consistently. All season long, that's been their Achilles heel, but as the playoffs have started, they've done a really nice job in that area as well. The Eagles shut down the 49ers' running game, holding them to 81 yards and 3.6 average per run. But now I want to dive into the additions that the Eagles made this offseason to completely revamp their defense. Probably the best value pickup that the Eagles got this offseason was signing Hassan Reddick, getting him to return to his hometown. He had a fantastic year, a career-high 16 sacks in the regular season, and he has been a force all year long. His career journey has been insane to look at. The first 3 years of his career, he had 7.5 sacks combined, but the last 3 years, he's had 39.5 sacks combined. So Reddick might have been the most productive pass rusher for the Eagles, but many people would not say he is the best, which I think tells you how great the defensive line is for the Eagles. The starting four on the line is Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, and Josh Sweat. And then behind them, they have their first-round pick, Jordan Davis, Linval Joseph, and Robert Quinn. And then also towards the end of the season, they signed Ndamukong Suh. So the Eagles have a ridiculous amount of depth and talent on that defensive line, and that is why they've been a historically good pass-rushing team with the amount of sacks they've gotten all year long. And then in the secondary, they've always had Darius Slay, who's been a very solid player for many years now. But they went out this offseason and also got 2 new studs that have completely revamped their secondary as well. They went out and got James Bradbury to play the other side of Darius Slay from the New York Giants. And then the Eagles completely robbed the New Orleans Saints once again, getting CJ Gardner-Johnson, a nickel/safety, for a 5th-round pick in 2023 and then 2 6th-round picks in 2024. But Gardner-Johnson is a really good player, and the Saints only traded him because he had 1 year left on his contract and they were not going to be able to afford him. But I was shocked that the Saints could not get more value back for him when this trade happened, because he's a very, very nice player to have in the secondary. So with the depth that the Philadelphia Eagles have built on their defensive line over the last few years and continuing to add pieces on it this offseason, and then to get 2 huge pieces to help out their secondary, which has been seen as a weak link up until this year, was huge for their development in their defense this year. It got the Eagles the 8th best scoring defense in the NFL, with only allowing 20.2 points per game. You combine that with the 3rd highest scoring offense in the league with 28.1 points per game, and you have an absolute powerhouse of a team. But I've already mentioned the talent on this Eagles roster and how deep of a team it actually is. But the Pro Bowl was this past weekend, and the Eagles had 8 players voted into the Pro Bowl, but obviously they didn't play because they made the Super Bowl. And that's not even mentioning the possibility of the 9 alternates that they had. So that's around 17 Pro Bowl caliber players on that roster, which is pretty much unheard of when you're talking about the current day NFL. But this has practically been a perfect season for the Eagles. They haven't really had much hiccups throughout the entire year, and they got 1 game left against the Kansas City Chiefs to be crowned champions once again. Looking at both these rosters, I think the Eagles have by far the best roster in football. With Jalen Hurts, the Eagles have only lost 1 game this year, and that was against the Washington Commanders in week number 10. So it's been a real long time since they've faced some adversity. That's going to be something I pay close attention to next Sunday if the Chiefs get off to a fast start and the Eagles have to respond to some adversity. They haven't been tested in that area much this season because of how dominant they've been. But who knows, maybe that trend continues next Sunday in the Super Bowl and they show their dominance for one last time this season. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. Let me know what you think of Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles roster and how well it's been constructed this season. But anyway, thank you so much for watching the video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.